Many years ago, there was a shop on the street. No, not that one. That shop was ordinary. Nothing special happened there. The one I'm talking about was not on the main street. It sat quietly between two stone houses, roof bowed under the weight of winter snow. A faded sign above the door that no one could read anymore. Inside, the air smelled of brass and oil. Small screwdrivers hung from nails in the wall, files and pliers and tweezers. In the far corner, under a glass case, lay gears the size of raindrops. And in the center sat a single workbench, worn smooth by 60 years of calloused hands. And here was where the watchmaker sat, an old man with hands like knotted wire, staring at an open watch casing before him, his lips moving soundlessly. The watchmaker had been emptying his shop for weeks, moving to a smaller space, shedding the burden of all those trinkets and treasures and tools he'd accumulated over the years. But this one, this piece of metal, this was different. It was more than a customer's heirloom. It was the last watch his father had worked on together with him when he was a boy. Then it became his after his father passed away. Now it was all that remained of his own hands, his only legacy. He closed the lid of the workbench, hiding its emptiness so that no one who came after would ever know how many lives he'd touched, how many hearts he'd held in his palm all those years ago. He didn't begin with drawing. He didn't begin with tools. He simply stared at the empty casing before him, letting memory fill the hollow space. There was music in the gears, a lullaby his father sang to him while they worked. There was laughter, too, echoing from cobblestone streets, the clatter of horse hooves and streetcars, the murmur of lovers passing by, sharing secrets in the shadows. There were faces in the whorls and scratches of the wood, each telling a story without end, etched into the grain by calloused thumbs. The watchmaker wasn't always an old man. Once he was young, too, a boy with hair the color of wheat and eyes that shone like polished steel. His father's hands had been like his, strong and sure, teaching him the ways of the world, showing him the magic hidden within machines. They spoke a language older than words, a communion of grunts and gestures and knowing looks. His father taught him about balance, about weights and wheels and the careful calibration of springs. He showed him how to read the language of a watch, the poetry of its ticking. Listen, he'd say, holding a pocket watch to his ear. It's alive. It's the heart of a machine beating inside its metal skin. When he learned, the boy's heart swelled with pride. He could make these clocks and watches dance in his hands, coaxing them back to life with every turn of the screw. But the old man wasn't always an old man. Time, like the river, keeps flowing. Seasons turn to decades. The melody of the city changed, becoming a dirge instead of a dance. The shop stayed the same, the sanctuary of ticking clocks and quiet routine. People came and went, but he stayed behind his counter, surrounded by the ghosts of time, the ghosts of all the stories he'd heard, the hopes and dreams and heartaches. Once, a young girl, no older than 8, came in with a broken music box, eyes wide and worried, her fingers clutching a velvet pouch. It stopped, she whispered, holding out a tarnished silver box, just like my heart. The tune it played, a lullaby her mother used to sing, a melody that echoed the ache in her soul. As he fixed the music box, coaxing the tune back to life, he saw a bit of himself in the girl, the same innocence in her eyes, the same love for music. When she heard the first notes, clear and sweet, she threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his coat. "You're the music doctor," she whispered, and he was. He mended broken pieces, not just watches and clocks, but hearts, too. The rhythm of a heartbeat is the same all over the world. He knew that now, was a weaver of memories, stitching together fragments of time. For some, it was a pocket watch, a wedding gift, a promise whispered across the years. For others, a grandfather clock, its chime a beacon in the darkness, marking the passage of time. He remembered the faces, the young and the old, the laughter and the tears, the hopes and the fears. All of them were part of the music, the symphony of life playing out its score. And he was just a conductor, guiding the melody, making sure the time was right. For him, it was never just a job. It was a calling, a way of life. A watchmaker doesn't just fix machines, okay? Mends moments, mends the things that make life worth living, okay? He's a keeper of memories, a storyteller, a listener, okay? He sees the best and the worst of humanity, okay? He witnesses the fragility of life and the resilience of the human spirit. A watchmaker is a philosopher, a scientist, an artist, a craftsman, an historian. He's a witness to the passage of time, a chronicler of moments, a weaver of memories. He's a storyteller, and his stories are written in the language of gears and springs, in the poetry of ticking pendulums. He remembers the faces that come into his shop. Okay. The young lovers seeking to immortalize their fleeting romance or grieving. Widows bringing in their late husband's pocket watch for one last repair. Through his craft, he becomes a part of their stories, a silent observer of the human condition. The old man closes his eyes, the scent of oil and brass heavy in the air. Around him, the tools of his trade, each one a silent witness to the passage of time. It's the ticking of clocks, a constant reminder of the fleeting nature of life. As he sits here in the quiet of his shop, he knows that he is more than just a watchmaker. He is a keeper of memories, a weaver of moments. The old man smiles, a lifetime of stories etched into his wrinkled face. Each tick of the clock is a note in the symphony of life, and he is its conductor. Outside, the world changes, but inside his shop, time stands still. The old man, surrounded by the ghosts of time, finds solace in the ticking clocks, for in their rhythmic embrace, he hears the music of life. Then one day, the music stops. The old man feels the silence like a physical blow. No longer does he hear the gentle tick-tock that has been the soundtrack of his life. The world outside his shop door seems to fade away. He opens his eyes and sees an empty room, a room devoid of the familiar sights and sounds that have been his companions for so many years. The gears and springs that once held such fascination for him now lie dormant. The workbench, once a source of comfort, is a cold and unfeeling surface. In the silence, he hears the echoes of laughter, the whispers of secrets shared, the murmur of lovers passing by. The scent of brass and oil lingers in the air, a phantom fragrance from a time gone by. The watchmaker rises from his chair, his joints aching, his steps slow and uncertain. As he looks around the empty shop, a single tear rolls down his wrinkled cheek. It is a tear for the lost music, for the silence that has fallen upon his life. In that moment, he understands that the music of time has stopped for him. The old man walks out of the shop, his head bent against the wind, his shoulders stooped with the weight of years and sorrow. The city around him seems indifferent to his pain, bustling with life and oblivious to the passing of an era. With trembling hands, he reaches out to touch the weathered sign above the door. It's paint peeling, its words barely visible. He can still make out the faded letters that once proclaimed his trade, a watchmaker. He closes his eyes, trying to remember the tune, the melody that has been his life's work, but the music eludes him. So the old man walks on, leaving behind the ghosts of time, the echoes of laughter, the scent of brass and oil, the music that once filled his days. He walks into the sunset, a silhouette against the fading light, a lonely figure carrying the weight of a bygone era. The tiny turning mechanism in question is actually just a very small part of a much larger clockwork contraption, which makes up this entire wall. You see, when you think of an escapement, you might picture something like this: a weight, a wheel, some rope, a spring. But how does that equate 2 seconds? Well, by controlling the release of potential energy stored in these coiled springs, you can have them unwind at a precise and steady rate. And by capturing those intervals between each coil's start and end, we can measure time. In fact, the internals of this particular device are so finely engineered that even with the naked eye, you can see the jump between 120 beats per minute and 60 beats per minute. The slowness of the former allowing us to tell the minutes, the fast latter allowing us to tell the seconds. But there's more to it than just counting rotations. No, sir, because here's the kicker. This entire mechanism, including the pendulum, is reversible. See, I can wind back the clockwork and start all over again. Now, keep your eyes on the big hand and we'll show you what happens. So, as the little hand sweeps around its partner, the big hand, it takes a few steps backwards, then forwards again. So the little hand moves forwards. Big hand stays put. Little hand moves backwards. Big hand goes forwards. Do you get it? Once we rewind the escapement, we do it all again in reverse. So if I start the clock again, the big hand will retrace its steps, and the little hand will move in the opposite direction. Fun, right? It gets better, because this isn't just a party trick. This entire clockwork mechanism is actually capable of powering itself indefinitely. By setting the pendulum swinging back and forth, we wind up the escapement enough to power the entire thing, and it keeps going and going and going forever. Or until the two gears intersect and the system comes to a grinding halt. But don't worry, because that only happens once every 18 million years or so. Until then, though, we can ride the wave of this beautiful machine in perfect working order. So now I've got your attention. Let me introduce myself. I'm a retired engineer and I love making stuff, especially when it involves tinkering with old school methods to achieve modern day results. A few years ago, a friend gave me this awesomely useless gadget, a digital timer. One day, he said, "Hey, why don't you make a mechanical version of this?" Being the eternal wise guy that I am, I responded, "Who wants to see a bunch of spinning wheels? Con." But then, and here's the thing, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Like every time I looked at this contraption, I thought, I bet I could make that. So I finally gave in and decided to go ahead and try. And while I'm no stranger to designing machinery, this was a whole different animal. Why? Well, because it's all about the details. Everything had to be just so, like the size of each gear, the type of material used for the shafts and rods. Even the finish needed to be perfectly smooth. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before I could figure out any of that, I first had to figure out the math behind it all. You see, the way that digital timers work is by using 2 stepper motors and 2 rotary encoders. These components allow us to both measure the speed of rotation and control the direction of rotation. But in my case, I didn't have any access to stepper motors, so I started to consider other options. My goal was to use the fewest number of rotating elements possible, but still be able to accurately track both the minutes and seconds. And after some extensive research, I came up with this design. Now, it has 3 rotating elements, but the way they work together is really cool. The outer ring controls the seconds, the middle ring controls the minutes, and the inner ring is just a synchronizer. It's basically syncing everything up and making sure they rotate at the proper speeds. To accomplish this, all 3 rings are interconnected, meaning they all need to spin in unison, but at slightly different rates. The second ring spins 60 times faster than the minute ring, and the minute ring spins 60 times slower than the second ring. So the numbers they display stay in sync with the real time. Pretty neat, huh? But now I could finally start putting this plan into action. I designed the basic structure of the entire mechanism and then set about finding ways to manufacture the actual components. And this is where things got interesting, because I wanted to make each piece as historically accurate as possible. That meant using tools like a turret lathe, a milling machine, and even an old manual surface grinder. After many attempts, I landed on a few key design features that helped me solve some of the manufacturing challenges. First, I went with stainless steel for all the external parts and brass for the internal parts. And I left the pins and shafts plain to reduce friction. Second, I opted to use bevel gears instead of spur gears, since they take up less space and require less tolerance. And I calculated the exact center distance between each gear pared down to the thousandth of an inch. Third, I made the teeth of each gear a bit thicker towards the bottom to prevent backlash. And I decided to go with 36 teeth for the minute wheel and 72 teeth for the hour wheel. Finally, I made the minute wheel twice as thick as the hour wheel to increase accuracy, and I also added a stop to the minute wheel so that it wouldn't spin too fast. With all these factors combined, I was able to create a gearbox that was both compact and efficient, taking up as little space as possible, while still being able to accurately track the passage of time. But I soon realized that there was another problem on the horizon, and it had to do with the tolerances of the gears themselves. You see, the tighter the tolerance, the better the fit and the less backlash, okay? But the tighter the tolerance, the harder it is to manufacture. And the cheaper the tolerance, the looser the fit and the more backlash. But it's also much easier to manufacture. So my challenge was to find the perfect balance between ease of manufacturing and accuracy. And after several prototypes, I settled on a fairly loose tolerance that worked well for a wide range of gear sizes. And although this wasn't as accurate as I would have liked, it was certainly good enough for a device like this. After all, it doesn't need to be super accurate because it's just a timer. But wait, there's more. I did a lot of tests to make sure it worked properly, and I found that the accuracy was within 2%, which was actually pretty good considering the cheap manufacturing processes used. But that's not all. You see, I also tested the robustness of the device, and it turned out to be surprisingly robust, being able to withstand lateral shocks, temperature changes, and even humidity without skipping a beat. This was great news because it meant that I had created a reliable and durable mechanism that could last a long time. In fact, I built two versions of the device, one with 10-tooth gears and another with 14-tooth gears, and they've been running for years with hardly any maintenance required. Sure, sometimes I have to adjust the tension on the springs, but that's about it. And I also had to add lubrication to the gearboxes, but that was pretty easy as well. Now, you're probably wondering why I chose such small gear sizes, okay? And the answer is simple. It was all about the aesthetics. I wanted the device to look as elegant and minimalist as possible, and that meant keeping the gear sizes as small as I could. Unfortunately, I can't reveal the exact sizes I used because that's part of my intellectual property, but I can tell you that it was definitely a balancing act. On one hand, I wanted to make the gears as small as possible, okay? But on the other hand, I needed to make sure that they were still durable and reliable. Ultimately, I settled on a gear size that met both criteria. It was small enough to give the device its elegant appearance, but it was also sturdy enough to ensure that it would stand the test of time. So now you know the story behind this crazy clockwork contraption. If you want to see more projects like this, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. The old man sat in his usual spot by the window. Sunlight slanted through the glass, warm and bright, illuminating dust motes dancing in the current. He watched them for a long time, their erratic flight paths weaving between the heavy furniture in the room like some silent, unseen choreography. Then his eyes drifted to the shelf beside him. There, beside a cracked book of sketches, sat a small hourglass. It was an unassuming thing made of blown glass, its thin neck constricted by two swollen orbs, one holding a cloudy amber fluid, the other nothing. He reached out a gnarled finger and traced the curve of its empty chamber. A faint smile touched his lips. It had been years since he'd done that, since he looked at it, really looked at it, and yet the sight of it now stirred a distant memory, a half-forgotten dream from a time when the world was sharp and new and full of promise. Back then, he'd been a young artist, hungry to capture every nuance of human expression in his drawings. Every flicker of emotion that crossed the face or momentarily distorted a form. And as part of this endeavor, he'd become fascinated with the way people wasted time. Not the passing of it, no, but the pressing of it, the holding of it. How they clenched and grasped at moments, squeezed the juice of life into sour regrets, or ground their lives to dusty disappointments. He'd made sketches of these people. Of course, their faces contorted in expressions of impatience or frustration. Their bodies frozen with gesture as they strained against the relentless march of seconds. But he wanted more. He wanted to distill the very essence of their taut nerves, the silent scream of their souls as they battled the relentless tick-tock of the clock. And so, he bought an hourglass, a simple device to visualize the inexorable passage of time. Its falling sand, a constant reminder of life's brevity, its silent message echoing the ceaseless rhythm of existence. Day after day, he'd sit and stare into the swirling grains, watching them trickle down from one bulbous end to the other, endlessly and inexorably. At first, he found comfort in its predictability, in the way its steady descent symbolized the constancy of the universe, the eternal recurrence of birth and death, creation and destruction. It was a grounding force in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. But then, he started to see something else in the falling sand, something that disturbed him deeply. He saw not just the passage of time, but the pressing of it, the way each grain settled into place, forcing itself between the others, the way they piled up and hardened, making it impossible for new ones to join them. He realized that the hourglass wasn't just a symbol of life's brevity. It was also a metaphor for the way we squander our potential, how we let opportunities slip through our fingers, like grains of sand slipping through an hourglass, how we let life pile up and harden until it becomes impossible to change course. It's possible to start again. And so he stopped watching the hourglass. He turned away from its silent reproach, burying himself in his art, pouring everything he had into his work, trying to capture the fleeting beauty of the world before it slipped away like sand through his grasp. But the image of the hourglass remained seared into his mind, a constant reminder of his own mortality, of the way he too was wasting away. Day by day, year by year, his life hardening into the past like grains of sand hardening into glass. He started drinking heavily, seeking oblivion in the bottom of a bottle, hoping to escape the ticking clock that seemed to mock him from the corner of his eye. But the more he drank, the worse it got. The more he saw the hourglass in everything the way the bartender poured a drink, the way a woman laughed, the way a child ran across the street, heedless of the honking cars. Everywhere he looked, he saw life slipping away, becoming irretrievable. And then one day, he woke up and realized he couldn't go on like this. He had to do something, anything, to stop the relentless flow of time, to make it stand still, if only for a moment. So, he began to draw again, putting everything he had into his work, drawing as if his life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. With each stroke of his pencil, he tried to capture the essence of the world, to distill the fleeting moment into something permanent, something that could last beyond the shifting sands of time. He drew faces frozen in mid-expression, bodies caught in mid-movement, landscapes suspended in eternal stillness. He drew everything he saw and everything he felt, pouring his heart and soul into his art. And for a while, it helped. The act of creation gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. In his drawings, he found a way to make time stand still, to capture the world as it was, to preserve it from the relentless march of seconds. But as the years went by, his drawings became more and more frantic, his lines thicker, his colors more garish. He was a man possessed, driven by a desperate need to hold on to time, to make it bend to his will. But time is a relentless force, and in the end, it always wins. One day, he sat down to draw, and his hand trembled so violently that his pencil skittered across the page, leaving behind a jagged line that mocked him. He stared at it for a long time, his mind numb, his heart heavy. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He He picked up his hourglass, turned it over, and let the remaining grains trickle down into the empty bulb. He watched them fall slowly, methodically, inexorably. And as he did, a strange sense of calm came over him. It was as if he'd been holding his breath for years, and now, finally, he could breathe again. The tension that had been coiled tight in his shoulders, in his arms, in his chest, began to unwind, to relax. He felt tears pricking at his eyes, but he didn't bother to wipe them away. Let them come, he thought. Let them fall. As the last grain trickled down, he felt something shift inside him. A release, a letting go. For the first time in years, he felt free. Free of the burden of capturing time. Free of the need to make it stand still. Free of the fear of its relentless passing. In that moment, he understood. Time wasn't what passed. Time was what pressed. The silence between ticks. The pause before decision. The moment when breath held too long becomes something else. That, he realized, was the purest form of life. He set the hourglass down and reached for his sketchbook. His hand was still trembling, but now it didn't matter. He knew what he had to do. He opened the book to a fresh page and began to draw. Not the world as it was, not the way it would be, but the way it felt, the way it pressed against his skin, the way it whispered in his ear, the way it tasted on his tongue. He drew the feeling of time, the sensation of its passing, the weight of its presence. And as he drew, he laughed, a sound that echoed through the empty room, sound that spoke of joy and sorrow, of loss and acceptance, of life and death. He drew until his hand cramped and his vision blurred, till the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness fell, until the silence of the night pressed in around him, heavy and sweet. Then he closed the sketchbook, leaned back in his chair, and surrendered to the darkness. Where a mainspring should have been, he placed something softer, a thread of silver hair, wrapped in parchment, sealed with wax. It was not a part of timekeeping. It was a part of him. He slid it into the case gently, whispering as he did, not a prayer, not a spell, just a memory of hands he had held, of moments he wished had lasted longer, some pauses that had once meant everything. Now they would live inside the pocket watch. Inside the glass case, suspended by a single silken thread, sat an eye. It wasn't like any eye he'd ever seen. Veins of blue and green pulsed through its depths, swirling and turning like celestial bodies on a black velvet backdrop. In its depths, he saw not just reflections of himself in the room around them, stars and nebulous, worlds unknown and unimagined. It stared back at him with unnerving intensity, an alien intelligence peering out from a shell of bone and sinew. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to rip it out, to crush it in his fist, to grind it into dust. And yet, he couldn't look away. The eye's strange pull was too compelling. What sorcery was this? The old man looked up, startled, his cloudy eyes sharp and clear for the first time in decades. For the moment, the tremor in his hand was forgotten. Fear tightened its icy fingers around Theodosia's heart. Was he reading her mind? Had she given herself away? Her pulse quickened. She had to get out of there, escape before he realized what she'd done. Huh? His gaze returned to the eye, and she heard a dry, crackling laugh escape his lips. "So you bring me this," he said, his voice raspy with disuse, "and you think I will help you?" She forced herself to meet his eyes, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "Because we both know the alternative, sir. You can't keep defying the council forever. They will find you. They will come for me." A shadow flickered across the old man's face, pain and resignation battling with something akin to defiance. With a trembling hand, he reached out and took the eye from its hiding place. He turned it over in his gnarled fingers, the light catching a flash of emerald green within its depths. "Do you know what this is, girl? Do you know what I have here?" Theodosia shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. She wanted to scream, to plead, to bargain, but terror had stolen her voice. he brought the eye close to her face, so close that she could feel the heat of it, smell the coppery temps that clung to its leathery surface. "It is a truth serum," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "a conduit to the deepest secrets of the mind. And with it, I can unlock yours." Her breath hitched. She had never intended for him to see the eye, but now it was too late. She had walked into his trap, and there was no escape. Her mind was a labyrinth of hidden chambers, of forbidden thoughts, and dangerous desires. What if he learned the truth about her mission, about who she really was? She thought of the Order, their unwavering pursuit of her, of the lengths they would go to capture her, to break her. She thought of the trust, the hope that had shone in Ash's eyes when she'd made her promise. She had failed him. She had failed them all. But in the depths of her despair, something stirred within her, a spark of defiance, a refusal to bend. No matter what he uncovered, no matter how deep he delved, there were things she would never reveal. Secrets that, even in death, would remain buried. She would protect them, even if it meant sacrificing herself. The old man hesitated, the eye wavering in his hand. Something in her face, perhaps the quiet strength in her eyes, or the set of her jaw, had stirred something within him. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just a flicker of the old magic that had once defined him. Whatever it was enough to make him lower the eye, his gaze searching hers. "You say you have nothing left to give, yet your eyes betray you. There is something here, something you are hiding. What is it, girl?" She met his gaze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew she couldn't lie to him, not about some things. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the words tumble from her lips. Not the whole truth, not yet, but some of it. She told him about the dreams, the whispers in the night, the visions of a world consumed by darkness. She told him of the Order, of their relentless pursuit of her, of the prophecy that clung to her like a shroud. She told him of Asher, of the bond they shared, of the responsibility that weighed heavy on her soul. She told him of her fears, of the doubts that gnawed at her, of the loneliness that had become her constant companion. As she spoke, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a burden shared becoming lighter. She wasn't sure if it was the truth of her words or the sincerity in her voice, but something in his eyes shifted. The hardness seemed to soften, the suspicion to fade, replaced by something akin to understanding. When she finished, silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. The old man looked away, his gaze distant, lost in the swirling mists of time. She watched him, her heart pounding, unsure of what to expect next. Would he turn her over to the Order? Would he use the eye to extract more information? Or was there something else, something she couldn't fathom, lurking beneath his wrinkled skin, behind those cloudy eyes? After what felt like an eternity, he finally turned back to her, his gaze intense, searching. You've seen much in my time. Girl, he began, his voice raspy with disuse, much that would curdle the blood and freeze the heart. But what you speak of now, that is beyond even my kin. To think that one so young should bear such a burden that she walks among shadows, while the rest of us bask in the light of day. He rose unsteadily from his chair, his joints creaking like a ship's timbers. He walked slowly, almost hesitantly, towards a corner of the room where an old wardrobe stood, its surface shrouded in dust. He reached out a trembling hand, tracing the intricate carvings that adorned the wood. "There are some things," he continued without turning, "that are best left undisturbed, some doors that are wiser to leave unopened. The world is a dark place, child, and some truths are best left buried. The council seeks you, then run, and do not look back. Forget that you've ever heard my name or laid eyes on this place." As she watched him, a sudden thought struck her, a question that had been burning on her lips. Why had he agreed to help her? Why had he risked everything, defied the council, opened his home to her? His answer came in the form of a sigh, heavy with weariness and regret. 'Cause, in the depths of my own despair, I found a kindred spirit, a reflection of the young man I once was. I see in you the reckless courage that led me to defy the very stars. And in your eyes, I see the same wild determination that drove me to seek forbidden knowledge. Perhaps it is in our nature, girl, to court danger, to seek out the darkness, and in doing so, find ourselves at the precipice of oblivion. With a final, lingering glance at her, he disappeared behind the wardrobe, leaving her alone in the musty silence of his chamber. There hung heavy with unspoken words, with secrets left hanging in the stillness. She could hear the rasp of his breathing behind the wooden barrier, the rustle of fabric, the scrape of leather, then silence, heavy and absolute, descended once more. When the wardrobe door creaked open, revealing only empty space, her blood ran cold. Where was he? Had he changed his mind? Was he going to hand her over to the council? She called out, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "Mr. Hemlocks, sir, where are you?" Only silence answered her. She moved towards the wardrobe, her fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the cold, unyielding wood. It was then that she noticed a faint shimmer in the air, a distortion as though a veil had been drawn aside, revealing a glimpse of somewhere else. A sense of foreboding washed over her, a premonition of something terrible. And there was a man who made watches, fine Swiss watches, complicated ones that told the time in 3 places at once. There was a drawer beneath the bench where he kept a box lined with velvet. Inside of it, one watch, small, gold-cased, simple, the first one he ever made. It no longer worked. The gears were rusted, a hand stuck. It had stopped measuring time a long time ago, but it still measured worth. It's because when he held it, he remembered the woman who'd worn it. Her name was Thea. He remembered the curve of her wrist, the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange while she waited for the seconds to tick by. 3 clicks of the second hand, and then she would speak, as if she needed permission from the watch to do so, to waste such precious seconds. He could still hear her laugh, metallic and bright, like the facets of a diamond. A sound that had nothing to do with clocks, yet everything to do with time. He learned from her how to measure seconds, minutes, hours, years, a lifetime. He never made a watch as good as that first one. Not technically. His newer pieces were more accurate, their balance wheels beating faster, springs coiled tighter, their cases smoother, more durable. They could withstand magnetic fields, extreme temperatures, the crushing pressures of the deep sea, or the vacuum of space. Yet, none of them captured anything real. None of them measured hope. He had a new piece on his bench, another complicated marvel of engineering, skeletonized tourbillon with a perpetual calendar moon phase and a heart. Beat titanium with 42 millimeters of stainless steel on the wrist. Whoever the watch was made for wanted every possible complication, every function, every gear, spring, and screw that measured something quantifiable, something cold and hard and real, while the man who made the watch wanted to measure warmth, to capture a smile. It's a quickening of a pulse. It's a feeling of sand slipping through one's fingers, the passing of time. He looked up from his work. The light had changed. Outside, the snow swirled lazily in the wind. It was almost dark, another day gone. He sighed and pushed the half-finished watch away. He didn't want to make that watch. Not today. He never did. Not after. He got up from the bench, walked over to the drawer, and opened it. Inside, nestled on velvet, the old watch. He took it out, its case cool against his skin, its silence deafening. He knew that it wasn't the watch itself that she had loved. If it had stopped working the moment she took it off her wrist, it wouldn't have mattered. She wouldn't have cared. What had mattered was what it represented. A shared silence, a moment of connection between 2 people who spoke without saying a word, between a man and a woman who taught him how to tell the time. She was gone now. Thea was gone. So was the watch. He He felt the smooth curve of its case in the palm of his hand. It was all he had left of her, of the life they shared, the faintest ghost of her perfume clinging to the strap. He didn't want to wind it up, didn't want to hear the click of the gear train, the ticking of the seconds hand. He didn't want to break the silence, to remind himself of what it couldn't measure anymore. He placed it back in the velvet-lined box, closed the lid, and put it away. He didn't want to look at it, didn't want to see the hands frozen at 10:17. He pushed the drawer shut and returned to his bench. He picked up the half-finished watch and turned it over in his hands. It was beautiful. The intricate workings of the movement, like a miniature city, gleaming towers of metal reaching for an invisible sky. He didn't want to finish it. Not this one. Not for a lifetime. He didn't know whose wrist it was meant for. Didn't know if the buyer would wear it, wind it, set it down on the table, let it tick, and measure the minutes spent laughing, waiting, hoping. He didn't care. He wasn't making this watch for anyone. Didn't matter if it measured a heartbeat, the gravitational pull of a planet, or the rotation of the Earth. He wasn't making it to tell the time, wasn't going to try to capture the fleeting feeling of a moment. He slipped the watch off his thumb, letting it fall to the table below. It hit the wood with a dull thud. Springs and gears scattered across the surface like fallen soldiers, defeated. He looked away. Didn't want to see the damage he'd done. Didn't want to hear the tiny clatter of metal on wood. Okay, he pushed the table away. It was time to start over. Time to start anew. Okay. He straightened his back, let the ache in his shoulders settle. He pulled the blank sheet of paper towards him. Time to make a new watch. To learn how to tell the time all over again. The next one was for him. He chose a small silver case, less than 30 millimeters wide. It's nothing special. Simple. It was going to be a quartz movement, precise and reliable. A battery-powered mechanism with no screws, springs, or chains. He laid out his tools, each one familiar and comforting. He took a deep breath. He didn't want to measure the world, just wanted to measure time. The ticking of a clock, the worry of a typewriter, the beat of a heart. He didn't want to measure the past. He didn't want to capture moments that had already slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. He didn't want to chase memories, just wanted to be present. He wanted to see the world turn over a new leaf. See the sunlight glint off the dewdrops clinging to the grass. Hear the birds sing in the morning. Smell the rain on the hot pavement. Taste fresh bread baking in the oven. Feel the breeze on his skin, the wind in his hair, a hand in his. He picked up the blank watch face, traced the edge with his thumb. In the center, a single hand rotating slowly around a circle. He smiled. It was all he needed. It would tell the time. That was enough. No need for complications, for calendars, chronographs, moon phases, or perpetual anything. All that measured was money. What he wanted to measure was emotion, his feelings, laughter, tears, joy, pain. He wanted to capture human experience. The watch ticked and clicked as he assembled it, each sound like music to his ears. Every gear, every spring, every screw, a reminder of the rhythm of the world. Kay tightened the last screw, stepped back, and admired his work. It was nothing fancy, nothing complicated, nothing broken. It was whole. He put the watch on a leather strap, wound it up, tucked it under his shirt, and closed the door to his workshop. He walked into the daylight, into the sunlight, into the warmth, back to where he belonged, back to life. No wind, no snowfall, unusual for December in the mountains. Thomas sat by his desk. The room was dark, except for the glow from the screen of his computer. Outside, the first flakes of snow fell softly onto the frosted window pane. They were so thin and light, they barely made a sound when they landed. He stared at the desktop on his screensaver. The grandfather clock in the hall had chimed midnight 20 minutes ago. Now, he listened intently. In the silence, he could hear the ticking of that clock. He could hear the distant ticking of the alarm clock in his daughter's room. Even the faint ticking of the clock inside his laptop. All around him, clocks were keeping time, but there wasn't a breath of wind. There was no sound of snow falling outside. It was unusually silent, which is why he noticed the tick of the old pocket watch on his workbench. The one he hadn't touched for more than 20 years. Its silver case lay on a piece of cloth. He picked it up, turned it over, and examined the keyhole. What was it again? An A for keyhole or an L? He couldn't quite remember. Windlass or winch. Didn't matter. He knew the right way to open it without even looking. I feel alone. He wound the watch once, just once, as his father had taught him. Twice would have been too much, and then its works might have jammed. His fingers trembled slightly as he placed the watch back on the table. The ticking had stopped. Then he saw it move. The second hand twitched and swept forward across the face of the watch. Seconds ticked by. The minute hand did not move. That was good. For now, at least. The silence in the house was absolute. He listened intently. Was the watch ticking? Yes, it was. It took a full minute for the minute hand to stir. Then it moved 3 times. Then it hesitated, did not move, but then moved again. 1, 2, 3. It took 3 ticks of the second's hand to make 1 sweep of the minute hand. That wasn't right, but it wasn't wrong either. Thomas watched the watch until his eyes grew heavy with fatigue. It was nearly 2 a.m. The watch was behaving erratically, moving forward 3 seconds at a time, then waiting. It wasn't broken. It was alive, breathing, like some strange creature. It was alive, and it was ticking. Or perhaps it was not ticking at all. He leaned closer and blinked. Was it still moving? Had he imagined those movements? He strained to listen, but the ticking of the grandfather clock drowned out any sound. The watch was still, but the clock kept ticking away the night. Thomas stood up and walked over to the grandfather clock. The chimes echoed in the hallway. He thought about his father, winding it every day. How the rhythm of the chime had lulled him to sleep hundreds of nights. How he himself had done the same for his daughter. How many sleeps had she been lulled to? By this time, her alarm clock was ticking too. He went into her room and gently brushed aside the curtains. The bedside lamp was already on. On the bedside table, next to her bed, the alarm clock glowed faintly green. He looked at the clock face. 6:35. His daughter was awake and downstairs. He could hear the clatter of breakfast dishes, the rumble of his wife's voice. Thomas felt a pang of affection. His daughter's room smelled of lavender and vanilla. The faint tick of the clock was drowned out by the sounds of the morning, yet he heard it, and then he remembered. When his daughter was little, he had often brought home antique clocks, pocket watches, alarm clocks, tower clocks. He would sit in this very room, winding them all, listening to their different ticks. His daughter would sit by his side on the rug, watching the hands turn. She had learned to tell the time before she could read, and whenever she woke up in the middle of the night, she would know exactly what time it was. Once she was old enough, she would get out of bed and come to his workshop to ask him to wind her favorite clock, the one that ticked the loudest. He had long since given up collecting clocks, but somewhere at the bottom of a drawer, he still kept the one that ticked the loudest. Later that morning, after his daughter left for school, Thomas returned to his workshop. The glow from the screen of his computer illuminated the room in shades of blue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. Holding his breath, he inserted it into the keyhole of the pocket watch and turned it. Nothing happened. Key. He tried the other side of the key. Still nothing. Had he imagined the movement of the hands yesterday? Did the watch work only at night, when the house was empty and silent? Now he wound the watch, but nothing happened. Perhaps it needed a lubricant. He opened the case and examined the mechanism. It's a beautiful filigree work. It seemed almost alive as the gears turned. Was that the problem? Did the watch need to turn in order to tick? He closed the watch and wound it again. Now it ticked. Slowly. Surely, it ticked. even though it had never ticked before. It was as if it had woken up after a long sleep and stretched itself and yawned. Only now did Thomas notice that the tick of the watch was different from the tick of the grandfather clock, the alarm clock, or any of the other clocks he had ever owned. The watch did not tick. It clicked, like a bird, like a mouse, like a cricket. It clicked, then paused, clicked again. Okay, he looked at the watch. The hands had moved on. The minute hand pointed to the 4, the hour hand to the 8. It was almost noon. And still, the watch clicked, paused, clicked again. Not fast, not slow. Just right, he smiled. That was exactly how he wanted it to be. The watch was doing what he had hoped it would do. Not measure time, but ask it to linger, even if just for a moment. He didn't care whether the watch gained or lost time. He just wanted it to stop for a moment, a brief moment, a moment that lasted forever. Wore the watch for 1 hour, or what he believed was 1 hour. He sat by the window, looked at the trees, the street, the unmoving clouds, listened to the silence between ticks. Each sound stretched. The bell tower did not ring. The street outside remained still. He blinked, once, twice. He looked at the clock on the wall. It had not moved, but the watch on his wrist, it ticked, ticked, slowly but surely, not counting time, changing it. There are 2 types of people in this world: those who have an inherent distrust for clocks and watches, and those who don't. Let's call the first group 10 and the second group. Why? This distinction is important because today we're going to do something we don't often do. Look at a watch from Group X's point of view. See if there's anything useful to be found there. Even if we ourselves belong to Group Y, the year is 2023. Watches have been around for about 400 years. Before we go any further, let's just establish now that yes, the Earth does rotate on its axis roughly every 27 days, and yes, the Earth also orbits the Sun roughly every 365 days. So time as a concept is pretty well established, even if measuring it isn't. But with all this in mind, how can anyone mistrust something as simple and irrefutable as a clock or a watch? Well, this is where we get to meet Group 10, those who distrust clocks and watches. Now, there's no official manifesto for Group X, no certification process, no formal membership requirements. Okay, in fact, you might not even know you are part of this group until someone shows you this video. But while there may be no leader of Group X, there are many members: ancient Greek philosophers, certain indigenous cultures, Henry David Thoreau, Jean-Paul Sartre, Alan Watts, and even some scientists. If you spend enough time around them, you'll start to pick up their language. For example, they'll talk about how clocks and watches only create anxiety and stress, and generally distract us from living in the moment. They'll tell you how these devices are nothing more than social constructs that make us feel like we're constantly behind on something. You'll hear stories about how indigenous tribes, whose days are dictated solely by the sun and the moon, live much more relaxed and fulfilling lives than we do, okay? And they'll show you experiments that illustrate how clocks can mess with your perception of time itself. In this last part, the bit about time itself is where things start getting really interesting. There are plenty of famous examples of clocks messing with people's perceptions of time. The most famous probably being the observation that a minute on the Alcatraz torture chair went by faster than 5 minutes somewhere else. But there are other examples too, like this one, which illustrates the relativity of perceived time. In 1992, psychologist David Eagleman recruited participants for an experiment. He strapped each of them to a chair and then showed them one of 2 videos. One of the videos was a still image, kind of like the old CD screensaver, just a bunch of dots seemingly moving across the screen. The other video was a moving image, a clock ticking away the seconds. After the experiment concluded, the participants rated the length of the 2 videos, even though both had actually lasted for the same amount of time. The video with the clock seemed much longer than the still image. Now, there are several explanations for why this happens. but none of them involve any sort of hidden truth about time. Rather, it's our brain's fault. Our brain processes new information by chunking it together with information we already have. In other words, when something new happens, we relate it to similar things we've experienced in the past. So, in the case of the moving clock, our brains chunk the experience together with other experiences we've had involving clocks, and we know that clocks tick. So we expect the video to be longer. When it's over, our brains say, hey, this experience is similar to others we've had involving clocks. Therefore, this experience must have lasted for approximately this amount of time. We then judge the length of the still image video in a similar way, comparing it to other similar experiences. And because there aren't any, we have no frame of reference for how long it should have lasted. So we just say the same as the clock video. Basically, what we take away from this is that time isn't necessarily a reliable guide. Our brains make a lot of assumptions about the world around us, and sometimes those assumptions are wrong. A clock in particular is a device designed to make us think a certain way about time, and we read not always right to trust that thinking. Okay? So far, so good. But there's another aspect of Group X's argument that we haven't considered yet. Some members of this group, particularly the indigenous ones, don't use clocks and watches, not because they think time is unreliable, but because they don't need to. They use the sun and the moon instead. They wake up when the sun rises and go to bed when the moon is full. And as a result, they tend to live more natural, less artificial lives. This sounds pretty appealing, doesn't it? Just letting the natural world dictate your schedule instead of this ridiculous human construct made up of gears and springs. But let's take a step back and think about this for a second. If the position of the sun in the sky determines when you wake up, and the position of the moon determines when you go to sleep, then that means your entire life is predetermined. You don't get to choose whether you wake up early or late, whether you go to bed before or after watching one more episode of Star Trek. The decisions are made for you by celestial bodies over which you have absolutely no control. Now, you might say, who cares? What does it matter if my life is controlled by the universe rather than by clocks and watches? Well, quite a lot actually. See, if your life is controlled by the universe, then you have no autonomy, no free will. Everything you do, everything you'll ever do, is predetermined. You are nothing more than the sum of your genes and your environment. The idea that we have free will is so ingrained in Western culture that we barely stop to consider it. But it's actually a relatively recent development in human history. Prior to the 18th century, most people believed that our actions were predetermined by forces beyond our control. This belief is still widespread today, particularly in the East. But in the West, thanks in part to the work of philosophers like Sartre and compatibilists like Harry Frankfurt, free will is widely accepted. Okay, now, we're not going to debate the merits of free will in this video. The point is simply that while we might be inclined to dismiss those who trust in clocks and watches as mindless cogs in the machine, those who trust in the universe even less so. So what exactly is Group 10 getting at? Well, at its core, Group X's argument seems to be this: the natural world is more real than the artificial world. K, to follow the natural world is more authentic than to follow the artificial world. And that's hard to argue with, isn't it? Everyone wants to be authentic, to live as naturally as possible. But if we're being honest, that's not what this argument is really about. Sure, the natural world is more real than the artificial world. And sure, following the artificial world makes us feel stressed and anxious. But at the end of the day, the sun and the moon, whoa, and help us make an appointment with a friend or catch a flight on time. For better or worse, we live in a society governed by clocks and calendars. And if we want to participate in that society, we need to keep track of time. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way things are. So, what are we left with? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. As we've seen, the way we perceive time isn't always accurate. Our brains make assumptions about the world based on our past experiences, and we have no control over the celestial bodies that dictate our schedules. So, who's right? Group 10 or Group Y? Well, it depends. There are times when it's helpful to keep track of time, making appointments, catching flights, making phone calls, etc. But there are also times when keeping track of time is more trouble than it's worth. When it causes us unnecessary stress or anxiety, or gets in the way of our relationships or jobs. In these cases, it can be helpful to tune out the noise and focus on the present moment. And that's where the watch comes in. The watch that ticked slowly but surely, not counting time, but changing it. Watches allow us to be present in the moment, to enjoy the silence and appreciate the beauty of the world around us without worrying about what time it is. Watches allow us to slow down and savor the present moment, to appreciate the beauty of the world around us without worrying about what time it is. In another life, or perhaps in this one, there are some things that just go unexplained. Some people even fear to think about them because they bring back memories of things that were once lost forever. As much as we try to understand the world around us, sometimes there are things that simply baffle our minds. For instance, what exactly is time? Is it real or just an illusion? What happens after we die? And why does my cat always knock over the plant when I'm not home? Today, we want to explore a phenomenon that has intrigued philosophers and scientists for centuries in time. Picture this. You're standing on a busy street corner watching the world go by. Okay? People rushing to work, cars honking their horns, sirens wailing in the distance. You feel the sun's warmth on your skin and hear a nearby construction site humming with activity. In that moment, you're fully aware of the passage of time. Every ticking second, every passing minute seems to have its own distinct sound and feel. Time is tangible. So now close your eyes and imagine what would happen if that busy street suddenly fell silent. The construction noises fade away, the cars come to a halt, and the people around you seem to freeze in place. What do you hear now? Can you still feel the sun's warmth without the sound of the city to contrast it? This mental experiment touches upon a profound concept that has fascinated thinkers throughout history: the nature of time. Have you ever wondered how we perceive time? Is it an objective reality or a subjective experience? How do we measure it, and what happens to it when nothing is happening? So keep watching as we delve into these questions and more, exploring the mysteries of time. What if the bustling city around you suddenly went silent, not just audibly, but in a way that defied the laws of physics? What if the flow of time itself seemed to stop? This isn't a scene from a science fiction movie, but a thought experiment that helps us understand how strange time really is. In such a scenario, the absence of external stimuli could make it seem as though time had stopped. However, scientifically speaking, that's impossible. Time, from a purely physical standpoint, keeps ticking. It's like asking if a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it. Does it make a sound? Well, in the case of an unnoticed sound, yes, it still makes a sound. Similarly, time continues to pass, even if we're not aware of it. The human experience of time, however, is intertwined with our perceptions and interpretations. Without the usual cues of a ticking clock or the change in the position of the sun, our internal clocks could get out of sync with the actual flow of time. So while time itself might not stop, our perception of it certainly can. In the quiet of the night, lying in bed, we often ponder the mysteries of existence. Why are we here? Where did we come from? And where are we going? These existential questions have echoed through the corridors of human history, finding resonance in the depths of our collective consciousness. They are universal, timeless, and deeply personal. Find solace in religious beliefs and teachings, which offer narratives and frameworks that attempt to explain the purpose of our existence. Others turn to philosophical musings, seeking answers in the realms of logic and reason. Yet for many, the journey of discovering life's meaning becomes a deeply individual one. So, here's a question for you to consider. If you could ask the universe one question about life, love, the cosmos, or anything at all, what would it be? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your question might be the starting point of a profound journey of discovery. In the vast expanse of the universe, filled with countless stars and galaxies, it's easy to feel insignificant. But within the grand scheme of existence, we find ourselves on a tiny planet Earth, orbiting a rather average star, the Sun. Our cosmic address is unique, making our existence truly special. But what if we could zoom out even further and put our planetary address in the mail? What if we could expand our perspective to encompass the entire known universe? Doing so reveals a vastness that is almost impossible to comprehend. Within this colossal expanse, the Earth, with all its wonders and inhabitants, including you and me, becomes just a minuscule speck of dust. Our planetary system, with its 8 planets and numerous moons, shrinks to a size that can be easily overlooked. Even our Sun, a medium-sized star, pales in comparison to other stars in the universe, some of which are hundreds or even thousands of times larger. When we contemplate this humbling realization, we gain a new appreciation for our place in the cosmos. We begin to understand that despite our seemingly significant lives, we are but a tiny part of something unimaginably vast and uninspiring. You know that feeling when you're driving on an open road with no immediate plans, no particular destination in mind? The wind gently flows through your hair as the engine's hum blends with the rhythm of the road beneath your tires. It's a feeling of freedom, liberation, and endless possibilities. It's unadulterated joy of being alive and moving. Experiencing the world without constraints or expectations is a reminder of life's simple pleasures. It's a moment to appreciate the beauty of the present, the thrill of the unknown, and the power of living life on one's own terms. And then, suddenly, bam, reality hits. You realize you've been holding your breath. The steering wheel's digging into your palms, and your foot's been glued to the gas pedal. In that instant, the magic fades, and you are left wondering why you did unhold on to that feeling just a little longer. Life, much like that open road, is full of such moments. Glimpses of pure joy and unadulterated passion that catch us off guard and vanish just as quickly. The question is, are we too quick to let go of these moments? Do we fail to savor the joy of the journey in our relentless pursuit of the destination? As you navigate the twists and turns of your own life's road, remember to pause occasionally. Take a deep breath, feel the wind in your hair and the sun on your skin. Embrace the uncertainty of the unknown and the freedom of the open road. Hold on to those moments of unadulterated joy a little longer. After all, it's not the destination, but the journey that makes life truly worth living. There is an old Zen story about a master and his student who were sitting in a garden admiring the flowers. The student, deeply immersed in the beauty of a particular flower, asked the master, "How long will this flower last?" The master, without taking his eyes off the flower, replied, "It already has." This simple answer carries a profound message that challenges our perception of time and existence. Let's break it down. The student, focused on the present moment, asks about the future. He wants to know how long the flower will last, implying a desire to preserve this moment of beauty forever. The master, however, with his calm wisdom, points out that the flower has already ceased to exist. From the moment it blossomed, it began to wilt. Each passing second moves it closer to its end. The present moment, therefore, is all we truly have. So, when we find ourselves deeply engrossed in the beauty of a moment, whether it's the blooming of a flower, the laughter of loved ones, or the warmth of the sun on our skin, it's essential to fully embrace it, to savor the present, because, as the Zen master reminds us, every moment is fleeting. It's already gone. Time is a funny thing. It seems to fly by faster as we get older. When we were kids, the summer holidays stretched endlessly before us. filled with adventures and fun. But now, it feels like the holidays are over before they even begin. Why does this happen? One theory suggests that our perception of time is relative to our experiences and the novelty of our surroundings. When we're young, everything is new and exciting. Each day brings a different adventure, and our brains process these new experiences at a faster rate, making time seem slower. However, as we grow older, our experiences become more routine and familiar. Days start to blend together, and time seems to pass more quickly. So the trick to making time seem slower, at least in this context, is to embrace new experiences and savor the present moment. Instead of rushing through life, take the time to appreciate the little things, whether it's a walk in the park or a good book. Create new memories and allow yourself to be fully present in each moment. Remember, it's not that time is passing faster. We're just getting older and more comfortable with our routines. But that doesn't mean we have to let time slip away. With a little effort, we can train our minds to be more mindful and appreciative of the present moment, making each day feel like a brand new adventure. A man was running late. Again, he hurried through the door and down the stairs into the subway station. A little girl stood patiently waiting for him. She held up her red umbrella like a traffic cone to direct traffic around her. She stepped aside when she saw him coming, but not before whispering into her phone, "He's here. Tell Grandpa I love him." Then she turned to the old man waiting beside him and said, "Can I get a lollipop now?" The old man smiled and reached into his pocket for a small velvet pouch. From inside it, he pulled out a silver pocket watch and handed it to her. She looked at it and then back at him. "I have to wind it," he said. She nodded and watched as he wound the watch. It clicked once and then started ticking as she smiled and tucked the watch into her pocket. As they walked toward the exit, the old man continued to talk into his phone. "The escalator makes me dizzy. If I go up, I feel like I'm flying. That reminds me of the day your grandfather proposed to your grandmother. He took her to an amusement park. They rode the Ferris wheel, and when it was time to get off, he got down on one knee and asked her to marry him. She said yes, and then he put this very watch in her hand and told her that every tick-tock reminded him that she was his forever." The little girl looked at the watch. She turned to her grandpa and asked, "Is that why you gave it to me?" "Yes," he said, "because you are my forever too." Back in his shop, he removed the watch, set it on the bench, unwound it gently. The room returned. The sounds, the light, the ticking of all other clocks resumed, but something had changed. He no longer needed to rush, not with words, not with tea, not with breath. He was an old man. Once his body had been quick and agile, allowing him to keep up with the demands of his work. But now there were creaks in his joints. And even though there was a stool behind the counter, his legs seemed to find the floor more comfortable. And if he sat down, he would never get back up. Or at least, he never thought he would. But here he was sitting. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He could feel the heartbeat of the earth through the soles of his feet. He could smell the wet soil and hear the birds. And when he tilted his head back, he could see the clouds passing overhead. What was happening? Hadn't he just been in a rush? The little girl had arrived in a hurry. They had hurried downstairs. She had almost scolded him for being late. And then he had hurried to wind the watch. But now the need for speed had vanished. He looked down at the watch. He picked it up and examined it as if seeing it for the first time. When he handed it over to the little girl, he had felt a sense of urgency. He had been winding the watch for her, but also for himself, for his own memories. His wife, her eyes, the way she used to smile. He closed his eyes, and the memories came flooding back. He heard the echo of her laughter. He felt the warmth of her hand in his. How long had it been since he had remembered her like this, since he had not been in a rush? The watch ticked on the bench before him. Tick-tock resonated within him, urging him to hold on to these moments. to savor the memories that surfaced with each passing second. With gentle hands, he folded the velvety cloth that had cradled the watch and placed it in a small wooden box. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of satin, was a single sheet of paper. He carefully unfolded it, revealing the neat script he had written years ago. Use only when the moment is too beautiful to lose. He reread the words, a smile touching his lips. It was a note he had written for her, a reminder to pause and appreciate life's fleeting beauty. Back then, he had carried the watch not just as a keepsake, but as a symbol of their love, a love that had endured the test of time. And now, it had brought him back to this moment, reminding him of the young girl with eyes full of wonder and a heart brimming with love. Looking at the unfinished tea, he realized that it didn't matter anymore. The warmth had faded, but the memory of the shared moment remained. In the quiet hum of the antique clock shop, he found solace in the past. Each tick-tock a testament to the enduring power of love and remembrance. The old man looked away, his eyes distant, lost in a sea of memories. The present faded into the background as he revisited moments from his youth. He saw himself again, just a young man in love, his heart soaring with each beat, mirroring the rhythm of the antique clocks that surrounded him. The walls of the shop seemed to whisper stories of yesteryears, and the scent of old wood brought back a flood of emotions. He smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. These moments, once cherished by his wife, were now his to hold. The watch in his hand grew warm. Kia, he could almost hear a voice echoing in the stillness of the shop, reminding him to live, to love, to cherish every moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the shop, he made his way to the counter. The stool beckoned, offering a respite to his weary bones. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself onto the stool, the worn wood creaking in response. Each movement was a testament to a life well lived, a story etched in the lines on his face and the gentle sway of his hands. He looked down at the watch in his lap, its intricate workings, a silent symphony of time's passage. The melody of ticking seconds, minutes, and hours had always been a constant in his life. And now, as he leaned back against the counter, he realized that this rhythm was more than just a measurement of time. It was a heartbeat. The heartbeat of his memories, of moments shared and loved ones lost. It was a reminder of the fleeting nature of life, urging him to seize every opportunity to love, to laugh, and to remember. As the darkness deepened outside, he was no longer aware of the shadows or the fading light. He was lost in the labyrinth of his thoughts, a place where time stood still and memories danced in the twilight of his years. He closed his eyes, letting the gentle ticking of the watch lull him into a state of tranquility. In this sanctuary of the past, he found solace and peace. Surrounded by the silent witnesses of time, he whispered a soft goodbye to the world outside. For in this moment, he was complete, content to let the echoes of his memories guide him through the twilight of his life. When he finally opened his eyes, the shop was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Outside, the world had moved on, but he was still here in his sanctuary, surrounded by the ghosts of moments past. The silence was no longer deafening, it was comforting, a familiar embrace that had cradled him through years of joy and sorrow. The watch in his lap was no longer just a timepiece. It was a lifeline connecting him to a time when the world was new, when love was his compass and hope was his guiding star. In the stillness of the antique clock shop, he found a peace that transcended understanding. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, he knew that he wasn't alone. He was held by the memories he had so carefully preserved, sustained by the love that had echoed through the ages. He was an old man. Yes, his body might have been weary, his steps slower, his hair whiter with each passing year. But in this quiet sanctuary, he was timeless. He was a young man in love, a lover whispering sweet nothings to his beloved, a father watching his child take their first steps, a grandfather sharing stories of a bygone era. In the tapestry of life, his moments were scattered like precious jewels, and he had the luxury of revisiting them whenever his heart desired. The antique clock shop wasn't just a place of business, it was a museum of his soul. Each ticking clock, each chiming chime was a chapter in the grand narrative of his existence. And as he sat there, enveloped in the warmth of nostalgia, he knew that he wouldn't trade these moments for all the riches in the world. He looked down at the watch in his hand, its golden glow reflecting in his aged eyes. He smiled, a smile that spoke of contentment, of a life fully lived. He knew that when his time came, he would leave this world a richer man, having carried the treasures of his memories close to his heart until his final days. And as the night deepened and the stars twinkled above, he let the symphony of ticking clocks lull him into a peaceful slumber. He dreamed of a time when the world was young, when love was his guiding light. Tamed, the future stretched before him like an endless possibility. In his dreams, he was young again, his heart filled with hope, and his soul set aflame with the fire of eternal youth. For in the realm of dreams, age was but a number, and time stood still in the sweet embrace of eternity. He looked out the window for what must have been an hour, watching the snow slowly accumulate on the ground outside. He didn't know how long he'd been sitting there, but it no longer mattered. Time was meaningless now. As he watched the snow, something changed within him. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a jolt of inspiration, just a slow dawning like the light of day breaking over a distant hill. It crept up on him until he realized he was no longer afraid. The fear that had been a constant companion since the accident, that gnawing, twisting thing that made each breath a shallow one and each step he took a gamble, it was gone. And he didn't understand why. It hadn't been a problem before. He'd worked around dangerous things all his life. There was a certain satisfaction in that, a control. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Life was dangerous. Sometimes it was beautiful, too, and that danger was part of it. When he was young, he would run toward danger. But then he learned to dance with it, to respect it, to use it. Kay became so good at it that he could almost feel its presence, sense where it lurked. And then it became a game, a challenge. He thrived on it. He was alive. But this wasn't that. This wasn't anything he'd ever known. It was different, and he was helpless. The candle burned low. Tools were clean. The room silent. He sat once more at the bench, not to work, not to think, just to be. The watch remained in its box, still waiting. He placed both hands flat on the table, closed his eyes. He did not fall asleep. He simply stopped needing to be awake. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, steady, as if it, too, had slowed. The world was quiet now. The wind had died down, and the storm that raged in his soul had become a low growl, a rumble in the distance. The fear wasn't there anymore. In its place, a vast emptiness, a calm he'd never known. Then he felt something wet on his cheek. Another drop fell, then another. Soon there were dozens of them, little rivers running down his face, mingling with the grime and sweat, leaving tiny trails in their wake. But they weren't cold. It felt warm, almost hot, as if his body was trying to melt away the ice that had formed around his heart. The tears came faster now, hot and heavy, and he couldn't stop them. They flowed from him, cleansing, washing, taking with them the last vestiges of pain. And as they did, the burden on his chest lifted. He gasped, sucking in air that tasted sweet and sharp. His lungs expanded, filling with the sound of his own breathing. The silence was broken only by the drumming of his heart. Then he exhaled, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. And in that moment, everything was still. The snow, the tears, the wind, the memories, all of it. he was in the present, anchored to the earth, aware of the cold seeping into his bones, the dampness of the wood beneath him, the scent of oil and metal in the air. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. When he opened his eyes, the candle had burned out. The shadows on the wall seemed deeper now, more alive. He blinked, trying to focus, and the blurry shapes sharpened into definition. The darkness wasn't all-consuming anymore. It was familiar, comfortable, like an old friend. He reached out, touching the rough wood of the table, feeling the grain beneath his fingertips. It was real. The pain was real. The touch, the smell, the taste. Everything was real. A sob caught in his throat. A sob of relief, of gratitude, of joy. He wanted to scream, to laugh, to dance. Instead, he sat still, savoring the moment, the feeling of being whole. It was fragile, precious, and he didn't want to break it. So he closed his eyes again, leaning back against a bench, listening to the wind howling its mournful song outside. The silence was deafening. No longer the oppressive blanket of shame and regret, but a vast, echoing space filled with potential. It was terrifying. And as the silence stretched on, he felt a new emotion rise within him, a flicker of hope. Maybe now he could start over. Maybe now he could find a way to make things right. Maybe now he could forgive himself. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. The fire had gone out, leaving only embers glowing in the dark. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, he'd have to go out into the world again. But for now, he was content to sit in the darkness, to be at peace. He didn't know how long he'd been there, but eventually the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hall, getting closer. He opened his eyes, watching the door as it creaked open and a figure stepped inside. It was just a silhouette against the light, but he knew who it was. He didn't need to see the face to recognize the familiar gait, the way the shoulders slumped. "You're still here," the man said, his voice gruff. He stepped closer, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. "I thought you might be gone by now." He stood up, brushing the dirt off his clothes. I didn't know what else to do." The other man sighed, shaking his head. "You don't have to do anything," he said softly. "You're not in trouble. You can just rest." He hesitated, looking from the man to the door and back again. "Are you sure?" The man nodded, stepping aside. "Of course," he said. "This is your sanctuary. You can stay here as long as you need to." He didn't move, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry about the fire, about everything." The other man's expression softened. He reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's not your fault." He closed his eyes, leaning into the touch. It was warm, comforting, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of belonging. They stood there in silence, two figures bathed in the soft glow of the dying embers, their shadows stretching long and thin on the walls around them. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the ground in a thick blanket of white, muffling the sounds of the world. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, he'd have to face the world again. For now, he let the warmth of the moment envelop him, knowing that in this place, in this moment, he was safe. This story has been adapted from an original piece of writing by Aaron Reynolds. Weeks passed, days melted into nights, and nights dreamed into days. The rain fell soft upon the roof, a constant lullaby, and the old man worked. His hands, gnawed roots of ancient oak, danced across the pastry case, coaxing life into dough, breathing stories into sugar and spice. Each swirl, each knot, each golden crescent held a memory, a moment captured in flour and fire. He wasn't baking for customers, was baking for the window, for the one who watched, a boy who came not to buy, but to be, to stand there day after day, nose pressed against the glass, watching the old man work. The boy wasn't a stranger. He lived above the bakery, hidden away in the dusty attic of the old brick building that housed the sweet alchemy of flour, water, and fire. He was a nobody, or so he thought. A face without a name, a shadow without a story, and he knew every story that unfolded behind that window. Every smile, every sigh, every whispered word was his own secret solace. He had come to the city with dreams in his pockets and stars in his eyes. Dreams that crumbled like biscuits in a careless hand. Hopes that withered like flowers left too long in the sun. And then he found the bakery, a sanctuary of scent and sound, where time seemed to slow down its relentless chase, and the old man with flour-dusted hands turned pain into pastries, sorrow into sweets. The boy had no money to spare, no riches to trade, but he had something the old man cherished more than gold. He had presence, the quiet gift of simply being. And so he stood there, a silent observer, finding comfort in the old man's solitude, sharing in the magic of creation. In the old man, he felt the boy's presence like a draft in the doorway, a shift in the silence. He didn't turn, didn't speak, but he knew the boy was there. He sensed the wonder in the boy's eyes, the questions in his gaze. In the old man, he saw stories in those eyes, a reflection of his own life, a younger version of himself staring back, reminding him of dreams long held and hopes almost forgotten. So he kept baking, pouring his heart into every loaf, every tart, every sugary masterpiece, because for the old man, baking was more than a craft. It was a conversation with the past, a dialogue with the ghosts of memories. And now he had an audience, a witness to a silent symphony of flour and fire. Then, one day, the boy was gone, vanished like the morning mist, disappeared like the whispers of the wind. The old man didn't notice at first, his thoughts lost in the rhythm of kneading, the melody of the rolling pin. But as the hours stretched on, the absence became a silence that echoed in the bakery. He missed the boy's presence, the quiet companionship that had become a part of his daily bread. He missed the stories that unfolded in the boy's eyes, the questions that lingered on his lips. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of longing, the old man realized he missed the boy more than he had realized. He missed the laughter that rang like the chime above the bakery door, the wonder that shone brighter than any star. It's the hope that bloomed anew each morning with the rising sun. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The seasons shifted, turning the world outside the bakery window into a canvas of changing colors. But the old man kept baking, keeping the flame of memory alive. Then, one day, the door creaked open, as if nudged by an invisible hand. The bell chimed, a sound both familiar and new. And there he stood, the boy, older now, but with the same questioning eyes, the same hesitant smile. The old man looked up, his heart stirring like dough in a baker's hand. The years melted away, leaving only the warmth of recognition and the echo of unspoken understanding. The boy walked in, his steps soft on the wooden floor, his gaze lingering on the pastries in the window. He looked older, wearier, but the old man saw the spark of curiosity still burning bright in his eyes. The bakery smelled like heaven, like 1,000 whispered secrets and untold stories. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and yeast, of caramelized dreams and sugared memories. The old man watched as the boy took in the sights and sounds, as if experiencing them for the first time, as if the intervening years had been but a dream. And then the boy spoke, his voice raspy from disuse, like a violin string catching on a silent note. I wanted to ask, he started, then stopped, searching for the right words. You've been baking all this time, he said finally, more to himself than anyone else, realizing the truth of it for the first time. The old man didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence stretched, filled with the unspoken understanding of shared moments of silent companionship. The boy nodded slowly, as if absorbing a profound truth, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. He looked around the bakery, taking in the worn counter, the flour-dusted shelves, the old oven that stood like a silent sentinel in the corner. And then he turned back to the old man, his eyes shining with a renewed light, a determination that hinted at dreams rekindled. "Can I?" he began, then hesitated. "Can I learn?" he whispered, as if afraid to break the spell that hung in the air. The old man's eyes twinkled, mirroring the light of the rising sun. He nodded, a single curt nod that spoke volumes of shared history, of bonds forged in flour and fire. The boy stepped closer, his gaze unwavering, and the old man, with the tenderness born of years and wisdom, reached out a hand, gnarled and strong like the roots of an ancient oak. The boy took it, his touch tentative at first, then firm, and in that simple exchange, a legacy was passed. A story continued. The old man led the boy to the counter, his domain, his sanctuary. And as the sun poured in through the window, bathing the room in golden light, he began to speak, his voice roughened by time, but strong as the dough he kneaded. He taught the boy the language of flour and water, of yeast and salt, of sugar and spice. He showed him how to feel the rhythm of the dough, how to listen to the oven's silent song. And the boy listened, absorbing the old man's words and ways, his eyes shining with the joy of discovery. As the day wore on, the bakery filled with the music of creation, the laughter echoing off the high ceilings, mingling with the scent of rising bread and sweet pastries. Outside, the world hurried by, oblivious to the magic unfolding within those four walls. But here, in this haven of flour and fire, time slowed, purpose bloomed, and a bond deepened, connecting to souls through the timeless language of baking. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows on the floor, the old man paused, his hands resting on the worn counter. He looked at the boy, at the eager face, the shining eyes, and he saw not just a student, but a part of himself reflected. A younger version, reaching for the warmth of the rising sun. "Okay?" And the old man smiled, a smile that crinkled his eyes and spoke of contentment, of stories shared and legacies carried on. He had found his audience once more, and in the boy's eager gaze, he saw the spark of wonder that had drawn him to the bakery all those years ago. "Okay?" Then, as if remembering something long forgotten, the old man's smile widened. He reached under the counter, pulling out a small, intricately carved wooden box. The boy's eyes followed the old man's hands, curiosity evident in his gaze. The old man placed the box on the counter, its presence a mystery, its purpose unclear. With trembling hands, the boy lifted the lid, revealing a velvet pouch nestled inside. He reached in, his fingers brushing against something smooth and cold. He pulled it out, and in the soft light of the bakery, he saw a silver pocket watch, its surface etched with delicate patterns, its hands frozen in time. Beside the watch lay a folded piece of paper, and as the boy unfolded it, a note written in elegant script came into view. The old man's gaze was gentle, his silence expectant. The boy read the note aloud, his voice echoing in the stillness of the bakery. "Use only when the moment is too beautiful to lose." The boy looked up, his eyes questioning, and the old man nodded, a knowing smile gracing his lips. The boy held the watch, feeling its weight in his palm, its coldness a stark contrast to the warmth of the bakery. He looked around him at the old man, at the familiar surroundings, and a realization dawned on him. The old man was right. This moment, this place, the shared history and the promise of the future were indeed too beautiful to lose. A wide grin spread across the boy's face, his eyes sparkling with gratitude and excitement. He looked back at the old man, a silent promise passing between them. The watch, he knew, was more than just a timepiece. It was a symbol of a bond forged in flour and fire, a reminder of moments to cherish, and a key to a future filled with the magic of baking. And so, the boy kept the watch, winding it gently to hear its soft ticking, a constant reminder of the old man's wisdom and the beauty of a life well lived. And whenever a moment was too beautiful to lose, he would take it out, feeling the cool metal against his skin, breathing in the scent of aged wood and polished brass. And remember the old man with flour-dusted hands and a heart full of stories. So that evening, he sat by the river. It was one of those days where there were no fireworks. The city didn't erupt into cheers at 6 p.m. The streets weren't jammed with honking cars or people. There wasn't even the sweet, comforting melody of a guitar. No serenades, no sparklers, no celebrations. That evening, only the river sang its ceaseless song. The boy sat on the bank, letting the coolness of the stone seep into his palms. In his other hand, he held his most prized possession, a watch, silver, intricately designed, ancient, almost an heirloom. He held it open in his hand, his thumb caressing the lid, as if afraid it might vanish, afraid that the mere touch would set it free. This watch was more than just a timekeeper. It was a promise, a vow, a hope. It held memories. Memories of laughter, of shared dreams, of whispered promises under the canopy of stars. It was a tangible link to everything they had been, everything they'd hoped to become. He brought the watch close, inhaling deeply, trying to absorb its essence, the essence of their love story. His thumb traced the intricate patterns on the back, each curve and design echoing the contours of his heart. The watch was silent, yet it spoke volumes. Volumes of love, loss, and an enduring hope. With trembling fingers, he opened the watch, revealing the delicate machinery within. Gears meticulously arranged, springs coiled and ready to unfurl, hands poised as if frozen in time. He stared at the motionless hands, the seconds hand frozen at 12 o'clock, the minutes and hour hand locked in an embrace. The last time he'd seen the hands move was the day he'd found this watch, a day that had begun like any other, filled with promise and potential. It had been a gift from her, a symbol of their unending love. She'd placed it in his hand, her eyes shining brighter than the watch's silver. "For you," she had whispered, her touch lingering on his skin like a caress, "to remind you that I love you always." He closed the watch, the metallic click echoing in the stillness around him. The world continued its ceaseless hum, oblivious to the silent symphony playing out by the river. The river sang its eternal song. The trees rustled secrets to the passing breeze. But he was lost in the labyrinth of his memories, a prisoner of moments both cherished and achingly missed. The river's song drifted into a lullaby, coaxing him into a realm of dreams where time stood still and her laughter echoed through the valleys. The moonlight painted silver streaks on the water's surface, each ripple a reflection of his pain, his hope, his enduring love. But the night deepened, the shadows lengthened, and the river kept flowing, relentless and indifferent to his plight. The silence pressed in on him, amplifying the ticking of his watch, the loneliest sound in the universe. As the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, he made a decision born of desperation, fueled by a love that refused to be contained by the boundaries of life and death. And so, that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of farewell, he sat by the river, the watch in his palm, unwound, silent. He waited, listened, then wound it once. The world did not stop, but it softened. The sound of the water slowed. The wind became a hush. The light stretched like a yawn. And for just a breath, the moment held. It did not slip away. It did not race ahead. It simply stayed long enough to remember forever. This is what happens when grief finds its poet, when sorrow meets its scribe, When despair pens its tale on the canvas of the cosmos, a masterpiece of melancholy is born. The protagonist, a man consumed by grief, its spirit as fractured as the shards of a broken mirror, reflecting a myriad of emotions: love, longing, despair, and an unyielding determination. The antagonist, the relentless march of time, symbolized by the unmoving clock, mocking the protagonist's desperate attempts to hold on to memory and love. The setting, a solitary riverbank, the silent witness to the protagonist's tormented vigil. The river itself becomes a character, its ceaseless flow a metaphor for the passage of time, something the protagonist is powerless to stop. The symbols in this narrative are as deep as the protagonist's despair. The old watch, a repository of shared moments, of whispered vows, and the very essence of the protagonist's lost love. Its frozen hands symbolizing the arrested time in his own life. The darkness that envelops him is not merely a representation of night, but of the darkness that grief can bring to even the brightest soul. The story unfolds like a dirge, a lament sung by the river, echoed in the protagonist's beating heart. The prose is as emotive as a symphony, each sentence a note in a composition of sorrow. The narrative voice, a blend of omniscient and first person, draws us into the protagonist's consciousness, allowing us to experience his pain, his thoughts, and his desperate bargain with the universe. The climax of this poignant tale lies in the protagonist's act of winding the watch, a simple gesture with far-reaching consequences. By winding the watch, he attempts to manipulate time, to make it stand still and hold. His love for her and the memories they shared become his anchor, the one constant in a sea of change. But the question remains, will time obey? The delicate machinery of fate grind to a halt for this man's love? Or will his attempt to defy the natural order of things come at a greater cost? The story ends on a note of bittersweet resolution. The protagonist's bargain with the universe is granted, but not in the way he might have hoped. Time does indeed stop, but not for him. The world continues its ceaseless churn, indifferent to his plight. Yet in that indifference, he finds solace. The river keeps flowing, the light keeps changing, but for him, there is an eternity of peace. The moment of stillness lasts long enough for him to cherish the memories, to relive their love story, to say the words he never got the chance to say. This story reminds us that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones left untold, the moments that echo in our hearts long after the final curtain call. It's a tale that resonates with anyone who has ever loved, who has ever lost, and who has ever wished for just one more moment, one more chance to say goodbye. The unanswered question that lingers in the air is, what would you do if given a chance to alter time, to rewrite a memory, or to relive a moment? Would you, like the protagonist, attempt to defy the relentless march of time? Or would you find solace in the acceptance of life's fleeting nature